5 years after casting away his fated mate in front of the entire pack, Alpha Griffin Cross stands at the edge of everything he once believed. When Ayanna Brooks appears at his gates unannounced, holding the hand of a wide-eyed little boy who smells unmistakably like him, his world stutters to a halt. Her voice is calm but strained. Their son is sick, and only Griffin can save him. Without another word, Ayanna steps over the threshold she swore never to cross again. Griffin had conquered rivals, led warriors, and ruled with an iron will, but it was the choice he made one storm-soaked night. To reject the mate the moon goddess gave him, that would haunt him more than any battle lost. The rejection ceremony had felt like control, power, freedom. Ayanna had stood before him, quiet, proud, and unwilling to beg. And for that, he'd told himself she was too soft to be Luna. She hadn't flinched when the bond snapped. She hadn't shed a tear in front of the pack. She'd simply bowed, turned, and vanished into the forest, the mist swallowing her like a ghost. He hadn't known she was carrying his heir. The last time Griffin saw her, Ayanna's long dark braid had trailed down her back like a banner of defiance. She had always moved like she belonged to the earth, calm in storms he couldn't tame. The way she healed others, without flair or demand, had irritated him once. Now, it's that same quiet strength she wears when she stands before him again. A mother now, not a mate. Her gaze doesn't waver. Her tone doesn't plead, but Griffin feels the undercurrent of desperation in her posture. He should have known it then. She never would have returned unless she absolutely had to. If you're listening right now, please subscribe and comment what city you are watching from. Now, let's continue. But 5 years ago, under a blood moon and a crowded sky, Griffin Cross stood at the center of the crescent moon courtyard, voice sharp as steel, spine straight with duty, and icy eyes that refused to soften. The gathered pack waited in silence, breaths caught on the edge of tension, their alpha cloaked in dominance and frost. Ayanna stood across from him, her hands at her sides, her chin held high despite the weight bearing down on her from every direction. She wore no jewels, no ceremonial threads, just a simple, dark cloak, wind pressing it against her like the night itself was trying to hold her back. The bond was a mistake, Griffin had said, loud enough for every elder and warrior to hear it. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "The goddess doesn't make mistakes," Elder Mara said from the left. Griffin didn't look away from Ayanna. "Then perhaps I do. But I will not claim a Luna I did not choose, a healer with no rank, a wolf who cannot even shift at will." Still, Ayanna didn't flinch. She didn't beg. Her silence was louder than anything he could have imagined. A defiant refusal to break before him, and that silence cut deeper than all the furious protests she might have thrown. "You are dismissed," Griffin declared, turning his back on her, the final gesture of rejection. "Leave these lands before moonrise. You will not be challenged, but you will not be welcomed again." The crowd parted as he strode past them. Not one eye met his. Some stared at the ground, others at Ayanna. No one moved. Behind him, he'd expected shouting, cries, collapse. What followed instead was softer, the sound of footsteps against stone, steady and sure, even as she moved away from everything she had known. Even as she walked through the judgment of 100 eyes. Even as the bond between them splintered, thread by thread, until it snapped with an ache that settled deep in his bones. She passed the border of the courtyard like a shadow peeling from light, and then she was gone. No one saw the way her hand curled over her belly as she vanished into the trees, cloak fluttering, face unreadable. No one, especially not Griffin, knew she was already carrying his heir. That night, the Alpha returned to his chambers and stood before the mirror longer than he should have. The rejection bond hadn't unraveled cleanly. He could still feel the frayed remnants of something raw beneath his ribs, but pride was louder, logic louder still. Ayanna didn't belong in the role of Luna. She didn't lead, she didn't command. She softened, and Griffin, for all his title and legacy, didn't have room for softness, so he locked her out of his life, his heart, and eventually, he told himself, his thoughts. But Ayanna did not vanish into dust. She bled, she shifted. She fought through the underbrush with nothing but instinct and pain guiding her forward. She collapsed 2 miles past the crescent moon border, crouched low against the roots of a sycamore, the first pulse of nausea already rising in her throat. The bond's destruction had ripped through her like ice water through veins, but something deeper had kept her standing. The moment the rejection severed, she'd known. She wasn't alone. A heartbeat inside her own. She pressed her hand against her abdomen, the world narrowing into silence and sky. It was too early to know. Too soon to feel certain, but she felt it. The bloom of life, unexpected and fierce, planted deep in her womb. Her child, Griffin's child, the heir of a bloodline that had just cast her out like ash on wind. She didn't cry. Not then. Not when the cold air stung her throat, not when her knees gave way and she collapsed beside a riverbank, and not even when dawn broke and she was miles from safety. She didn't cry because something else rose up to take its place. A vow. Unspoken, sealed in marrow. He would never know, and this child would never need him. That night, under stars she could no longer name, Ayanna whispered to her unborn child a promise. You will never feel like a mistake. And with that, she disappeared into the human world, vanishing from the threads of pack and prophecy, her name spoken only in whispers, if at all. Back in Crescent Moon, Griffin kept walking like his chest didn't ache every time he passed the infirmary where she used to work. He buried himself in training, patrols, alliances, claimed Luna candidates from noble bloodlines. None of them stuck, none of them had her eyes. He told himself it didn't matter. He had power. He had order. The bond was broken. He'd chosen strength. But late at night, in the quiet hours between duty and sleep, he sometimes caught himself listening for a voice that no longer lived within his reach. He never found it, until 5 years later, she returned, and brought with her a reason he never knew to hope for and a cost he might not be able to pay. The night Jalen came into the world was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that soothed, but the kind that trembled, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Ayanna lay curled on a thin mattress in the back room of a weathered cottage at the edge of a human village, her fingers gripping the sheets as another contraction rolled through her. No midwife, no pack, no healer's circle humming ancient chants. Just the bitter scent of herbs she'd boiled herself, the rag between her teeth, and the soft thump of rain against the wooden roof as her body wrenched itself open. She hadn't planned for it to be like this, but then again, nothing about the last 9 moons had gone according to plan. When the child's cry finally split the air, Ayanna's whole world tilted. She pulled him to her chest with shaking arms, tears tracking silently down her cheeks as she whispered his name. Jalen. Her voice trembled, full of something that tasted like both victory and grief. He was small, impossibly small, but his eyes were open, blinking at the world with ancient awareness, as if he already understood what he'd been born into. He didn't cry again. He just watched her, silently, as if memorizing the shape of her face. From that night forward, they belonged only to each other. Ayanna told no one who the father was. In the village, she was the soft-spoken herbalist who arrived out of nowhere and kept to herself. She helped where she could, healed what she was able, and vanished when people asked too many questions. The humans never guessed what she truly was, not when her eyes flashed silver during a storm, not when she walked barefoot through the frost, not when Jalen started speaking in full sentences before his 2nd birthday. The child was bright, brighter than most children twice his age. He absorbed language like breath, listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, it was always with a softness that reminded Ayanna too much of the man who had never known him. He had Griffin's eyes. She tried not to see it, but there it was. Every time he blinked at her from beneath his mop of black curls, every time he furrowed his brow in deep thought, the past stared right back at her. Still, Ayanna loved him fiercely. with a love that was bone-deep, primal, and made of all the things she'd once been denied. She taught him to run barefoot under the stars, to gather herbs and whisper thanks to the trees, to hold animals gently and never raise his voice unless it was to protect someone smaller. She taught him the old ways, the ones the pack had forgotten, not because she expected him to shift, but because she wanted him to remember who he was when the world eventually tried to tell him otherwise. But something was wrong. It started as night sweats, fevers with no clear cause, then stomach pain, migraines, sudden moments of disorientation. Human doctors could find no explanation. Blood work came back clean. And still, Jalen would wake in the middle of the night, clutching his chest, crying out like something inside him was breaking free and failing. Ayana knew that kind of pain. It was the pain of a wolf trying to surface and being locked too far below. She tried to deny it at first, told herself his wolf would come later, that maybe he'd inherited more of her humanity than Griffin's bloodline. But deep down, she knew the truth. The wolf inside Jalen wasn't just slow, it was trapped, suppressed, and that meant he was dying. He never complained, even when he was too weak to stand, even when his hands trembled after one of his episodes. He'd simply look at her with those storm-colored eyes and say, "I'm okay, Mama," like the lie might protect her. He was 5 years old, and Ayana felt helpless. She tried everything. Healing herbs, moon water, rituals she hadn't performed since her days as a novice under the crescent moon seers. Nothing worked. The illness, if that's what it even was, didn't behave like anything human. It pulsed with magic, with blocked instinct, with lineage. One night, after bathing him and settling him beneath wool blankets, she sat beside him and brushed the damp hair from his brow. "Do you ever feel different?" she asked softly. Jalen nodded, eyes closed. "I can hear the woods sometimes, even when we're inside, but it's quiet now, like someone closed a door." Ayana's heart cracked. The wolf was calling, and it was getting fainter. That night, she stood beneath the moon, barefoot in the dirt, her arms open to the sky. For the first time in years, she called out to the goddess she had once believed had forsaken her. "If this is the price," she whispered, "for rejecting what I was meant to have, take it from me, but not him. Please, not him." The wind didn't answer, but her decision came like breath after drowning. There was only one being alive, whose blood ran through Jalen's veins strong enough to unlock what was buried. Griffin Cross. Ayana packed the next morning, quietly, efficiently. She wrapped Jalen in a shawl, tucked his favorite book beneath her coat, and walked away from the life she'd carved out of brokenness and wild things. She did not look back, and as they passed the boundary stones into werewolf territory once more, Jalen asked, "Where are we going?" "To meet someone," Ayana said, her voice barely steady. "Someone you need." He looked up at her, eyes curious. "Will he know me?" She couldn't answer that, not yet. But she held his hand tighter, because one way or another, the shadows of the moon were lifting, and the truth was coming with the dawn. Jalen was 5 the first time he collapsed. It happened just before dawn, as Ayana was steeping herbs in the kitchen, steam curling into the stillness of their cottage. One moment, she was humming, some half-forgotten lullaby from her own childhood, and the next, there was a sound. Not a crash, not even a cry, just a soft thump like a body folding too gently to be natural. She found him on the floor of his bedroom, eyes wide open but unfocused, his small frame trembling. His lips were pale, his breathing shallow. When she gathered him into her arms, his skin was cold, as if the warmth had been pulled from him all at once. "Mama," he rasped, barely audible. "Something inside me hurts." It was a pain she couldn't see, couldn't reach, couldn't heal. The nearest human doctor found nothing. Blood tests, scans, examinations. Everything returned normal. Stress, the woman said. Maybe anxiety. He's too young for this kind of pressure, Ms. Brooks. Ayana didn't correct her. Let her believe Jalen was just another delicate boy, too quiet for the noise of the world. But inside, something ancient stirred with dread. This wasn't human. It was wolf. That night, when Jalen finally drifted into a fitful sleep, Ayana packed a small bag and rode 3 hours into the hills where the veil between magic and medicine still held. The woman she sought lived in a cabin strung with bones and herbs, her eyes milk-white and her voice like gravel soaked in honey. "You've kept the boy hidden," the healer said before Ayana even spoke. "The wolf inside him is screaming." Ayana dropped to her knees. "Please, I need to know what's wrong. He's in pain, and I don't know how to help him." The healer placed one trembling hand over Ayana's heart, then her belly, then her throat. "You are marked. Old pain, deep, betrayal, and a severed bond." Ayana said nothing. The words scraped like thorns, but she let them pierce. What mattered now was Jalen. "He's 5, she said. "His wolf hasn't surfaced." Not even a whisper. The healer's eyes didn't blink. "Because it cannot." Ayana felt her breath catch. "He carries power not yet awakened. A wolf like his does not come softly. It demands. It chooses when to rise. But something in him is shackled. Not by his will, not by yours." Her voice lowered, became darker. "A broken legacy. Split bloodline. The father's absence is the lock. The boy cannot shift because he does not know who he is." Ayana shook her head. "I've raised him in love. I've told him stories, taught him the old ways." "Stories are not blood," the healer cut in. "You cannot birth an alpha and expect him to grow in silence. The wolf inside needs recognition. It needs the bond of origin. Without it, the body will break. The pain you're seeing, the seizures, the weakness, it's the wolf trying to rise without permission." She rose, her fingers curling like claws. "You wait too long, and he will die." The words hit harder than she expected, but deep down, Ayana had already known. She'd felt it. Every time Jalen winced at light, every time he clutched his chest and whispered, "It's like I'm missing something," she'd wondered. "Is there anything I can do?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. The healer studied her. "There is always a choice, but you won't like it." Ayana didn't blink. "You must return to the father. He is the key. His presence, his blood, his acknowledgement. It is the only thing that can awaken what sleeps. Without the alpha, the heir dies." Ayana felt her stomach turn. "He rejected us." "Then make him see what he threw away." She stood in the doorway of the cabin for a long time before leaving. The moon hung low and thick, a silver coin pressed against the ski. In her arms, the leather bag of herbs felt useless. No tincture could undo what had been denied. No poultice could replace a name Jalen had never been allowed to speak. She returned to the cottage and sat beside his bed. Jalen stirred in his sleep as if he felt the shift inside her, even in his dreams. She brushed his curls back from his damp forehead and whispered, "I didn't want to need him. I swore we wouldn't." But the ache in his little body was real. The fever, the pain, the wolf inside clawing at walls it couldn't break without its other half. This was not about pride anymore, or pain, or the cold echo of Griffin Cross's rejection. This was about their son, and the truth she could no longer outrun. She would go back. She would face him, not for love, not for closure, for Jalen, because her child's life depended on the man who'd once cast them both aside. And whether he deserved that chance or not, she would demand it, because a wolf without a howl would not survive. And Ayana refused to bury her son without ever hearing him roar. The scent of Crescent Moon territory hit her before the border came into view. Pine and smoke, damp earth, the faint hum of wards still strung between the trees. Her fingers curled tighter around Jalen's as they approached, each step heavier than the last. He walked beside her in silence, eyes wide, drinking in the towering forest, the ancient symbols etched into stones, half swallowed by moss. This place pulsed with history, with power, with the bond she had once belonged to, and had been cast out from. 2 border guards stepped into view as they crested the ridge. One shifted forward, nostrils flaring, hackles rising, the other stilled, his gaze fixed not on her, but on the boy. Ayana didn't flinch. She didn't bare her throat. She didn't ask for passage. She just said calmly, "I need to speak with Alpha Cross." The taller guard narrowed his eyes. "You've got some nerve. Look at him," the second guard cut in, voice barely above a whisper. Jalen tilted his head, confused. The wind shifted, and in that instant there was no denying it. Griffin's scent lived in the boy. One of them shifted into wolf form and took off toward the pack grounds without another word. The other remained, tense, watching them with a gaze Ayana couldn't read. Suspicion, curiosity, maybe something like awe. It didn't matter. The message had been sent. She stood on the edge of the world that had once been hers, back straight, shoulders squared, though her heart pounded in her chest like a war drum. It took less than 10 minutes. Hoofbeats, then boots, then silence, and then Griffin. He stepped through the tree line like a ghost risen from earth and memory, taller than she remembered, sharper around the edges. His eyes landed on her, and something in his expression cracked just for a moment. Then he saw the boy. The air changed. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at Jalen like he'd been struck. Ayana felt Jalen shift beside her, small fingers curling tighter around hers. He took one step back, almost instinctively, and she could feel his confusion, his apprehension. Griffin's voice came low, hoarse. What is this?" She met his gaze without wavering. "This is Jalen. He's 5. He's your son." The world didn't explode. It simply stopped. Around them, more wolves began to gather. Guards, scouts, packmates she hadn't seen in half a decade. Whispers stirred like dry leaves on wind. The Alpha said nothing. Ayana kept her voice steady. "I didn't come here to reopen old wounds. I came because he's sick. Because his wolf hasn't surfaced. Because no healer, no herb, no ritual has worked. He's dying, Griffin. And whether I want to be here or not doesn't matter anymore." Griffin took one step forward, then another. He dropped to one knee before the boy, his eyes searching the small face that mirrored his own. "Jalen," he whispered. Jalen blinked up at him. "Are you the Alpha?" A flicker of pain passed through Griffin's features. "Yes." "Are you my father?" Silence. And then Griffin's voice cracked open at the edges. "Yes." A gasp from behind them. One of the onlookers dropped something, a basket of roots or herbs. It scattered on the ground. Griffin rose slowly, turned his gaze on Ayana again. "You kept him from me." "I kept him alive," she said coldly. "You made your choice." "I didn't know." "You didn't ask," she snapped, then stopped herself. "Not here. Not in front of Jalen." She swallowed her fury. "We can fight later. Right now. He needs help." Griffin's jaw tightened. She could see the war in him. The shame, the anger, the bone-deep regret trying to claw its way up through his pride. He looked at the boy again, and this time the hardness in him broke. "Come with me," he said. She hesitated. "I won't send you away," he added quietly. "Not again." She nodded once. The walk to the main grounds was short, but every step felt like walking through fire. Wolves stopped what they were doing. Some stared, some whispered, some narrowed their eyes. Not all recognized her at first. Time had changed her, but once they saw the boy. One elder stepped into her path. "Ayana Brooks," she said, her tone unreadable. "You were exiled. You returned without permission." She came with my son, Griffin growled before Ayana could speak. You will show her the respect she is owed. The elder's eyes widened slightly. Then she bowed, not to him, to Jalen. The ripples spread fast. Some bowed, some didn't. They passed through the gates. The pack was a divided thing. Some saw her return as prophecy unfolding, others as threat reborn. But Ayana didn't look at them. She kept her eyes forward, her hand in Jalen's, her spine straight. She had not come back as the girl they'd cast out. She had returned as a mother, as Luna, whether they saw it or not. The door to Griffin's war room closed with a quiet thud behind them, shutting out the whispers, the gawking, the questions neither of them had time for. Inside, it was just the two of them, and the weight of 5 years' worth of silence pressing thick between every breath. Ayana stood with her arms crossed, not out of defiance, but out of defense. There was nothing left in her to soften, not here, not now. She was no longer a girl waiting to be chosen. She was a mother who had already lost too much. Griffin didn't sit. He paced once across the stone floor, then turned, his eyes fixed on her like a storm waiting to break. Why didn't you tell me? The question came low, tight, like it had been gnawing at the inside of his chest since the moment Jalen spoke his name. Because you made your choice, Ayana answered evenly. You didn't want me. You didn't want the bond. You stood before the entire pack and rejected the life the moon goddess gave you. His jaw clenched. I rejected a Luna I thought I didn't need. I didn't know you were pregnant. You never asked, she cut in. You never gave me the space to speak. You were so determined to be in control, to protect your image, your rank. You didn't look at me. Not really. Not once. He looked like she'd slapped him, but Ayana didn't stop. I would have never come back here if I had any other choice. But I've exhausted every option. Jalen's wolf hasn't surfaced. His body's breaking under the pressure. He's getting weaker every day, and the only reason I'm standing in this room is because I can't let him die. Griffin lowered himself into the chair behind the long stone table, but there was nothing relaxed in his posture. His hands were clenched on the edge, knuckles white. You think this is my fault? Ayana laughed softly. Not cruel, but tired. It's not about blame. It's about blood. Yours. His. The bond he was born from, the one you snapped before he took his first breath. His eyes flicked up. You think the broken bond did this to him? I know it did. She stepped forward, voice gaining strength with each word. I went to a seer. She said the wolf inside him is suppressed, not dormant, not late. Locked, trapped, because he doesn't know who he is, because the part of him that comes from you is still missing. Griffin was quiet for a moment, his stare unreadable. So, what do we do? She swallowed. There's a ritual, an old one, forbidden in some packs, forgotten by others. It can reawaken a wolf forced into suppression, but it's dangerous, and it only works if both parents are present. He frowned. Why? Because it requires more than presence, she said. It requires truth, blood recognition. The child has to feel the bond between his parents, has to see it. The magic doesn't respond to words, it responds to connection. Real, soul-deep connection, not just the bond you broke, the one you have to restore. His expression shifted just slightly. You want me to? I don't want anything from you, Ayana snapped. But our son is dying, and this is the only thing left that might save him. Silence filled the space like smoke. Griffin rose slowly. He crossed the room until he stood just a foot away from her, the heat of him unmistakable, the scent of power and regret rolling off his skin in waves. I never stopped regretting that night, he said quietly. I thought I was doing what was best for the pack, that you'd be safer away from all this, that someone better suited would come along. Her eyes met his. Someone more powerful. He didn't deny it. She shook her head. And now your son might die because of that choice, because you couldn't bear to let yourself feel. Griffin's breath hitched. Then let me fix it. Ayanna blinked. You do the ritual? If it saves him, he said, voice rough, I'll do anything. For the first time, her shoulders dropped slightly. It won't be easy. You'll have to open the bond. Not just pretend, not just stand in the room. You'll have to let me back in, fully, even if it's just for the ritual. He hesitated, and in that moment, she saw it. Not the alpha, not the warrior, not the pride or the title, but the man who'd once held her hand under the moonlight before it all broke. I will, he said. Whatever it takes. Ayanna nodded once, slowly. We'll need a sacred space. Stone, earth, running water, moonlight, and time. The ritual only works at its peak, the next full moon. 3 nights from now, Griffin murmured. 3 nights, she confirmed. He stepped back, giving her space again, but the air between them remained charged, heavy with what had been and what might come next. As she turned toward the door, he spoke again. I'm sorry. She paused. I don't expect forgiveness, he added, but I needed you to know that. Ayanna looked over her shoulder, eyes unreadable. Then show me. Don't say it. Show me. And then she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her. And Griffin Cross, Alpha of Crescent Moon, stood alone, facing the blood he'd spilled, the bond he'd severed, and the impossible chance to make it right. The moon hung heavy overhead, full and silver, casting its light over the stone clearing like a silent witness. The ritual grounds, sacred and untouched, lay hidden deep within the crescent forest, protected by enchantments older than the bloodlines themselves. No one entered unless called. And tonight, Griffin Cross came not as Alpha, but as a man stripped bare. He stood at the edge of the circle, barefoot, shirtless, the cold air biting at his skin. Ash marked his chest in ancient symbols drawn by the seer who waited silently across from him. A shallow bowl of sacred water shimmered in the moonlight. A dagger, ceremonial and unforgiving, rested at the center of the altar stone. You know what is required, the seer said, her voice low and ageless. You broke the mate bond. The moon must deem you worthy to restore it. Griffin nodded once, the weight of her words pressing down harder than his title ever had. This wasn't about strength or dominance. He couldn't fight his way through this. There was no enemy to conquer but himself. He stepped into the circle. The air shifted instantly, thickening, time bent. Wind hushed, and then the first flame sparked from the earth, blue and flickering, dancing in a slow spiral around his feet. Speak your truth, the seer commanded. Call your regret. Griffin closed his eyes. At first, there was only silence. Then, Ayanna's voice, soft and fractured, echoed in his mind. You didn't look at me. Not really. Not once. The memory slammed into him. He saw himself standing before her 5 years ago, cold and unyielding, saw the way her shoulders trembled but never fell, saw her turn without a word, vanishing into the mist, and he had done nothing, not followed, not questioned. Another voice rose, younger, Jalen's. Are you my father? Griffin staggered back, breath stolen from his lungs, the magic pulled at him, unrelenting. Visions surged. Ayanna in pain, alone, giving birth in a room with no pack to protect her. Jalen as an infant, crying in the dark. No lullaby, but his mother's tired whispers. Ayanna on her knees before a healer, her voice cracking as she begged for answers. Jalen's body convulsing in sleep, small hands clutching at a chest too small to bear the weight of a wolf that could not wake. Griffin fell to his knees. The visions didn't stop. He saw himself years ago, sitting on his throne, surrounded by advisors, choosing candidates for Luna. Women with perfect pedigrees, empty smiles, and not a single thread of the bond. He'd told himself it was enough. That strength didn't need softness, but the truth howled in the vision's wind. He hadn't been strong. He'd been afraid of how Ayana made him feel. Afraid of the way her presence unmade him, not with weakness, but with tenderness he didn't know how to carry. "You feared her," a voice said. "Not the seer, the moon." It spoke in his blood, in his bones, in the air itself. "I feared losing control," he whispered. "And what did that fear cost you?" "Everything," the wind screamed. He saw Jalen again, so small, so bright, fighting to live in a body torn by inherited power and an absence he had no name for. "Do you still seek to lead?" the moon asked. Griffin bowed his head. "Only if I can lead with truth, if I can serve what I failed." "Do you seek to claim your mate?" "I seek to deserve her." The circle flared with light, gold and fierce. The flames spun faster, faster, until they formed a ring around him. The ash on his chest burned, the symbols glowing, searing into flesh. "Then offer what pride cannot give," the moon whispered. "Offer yourself." He reached for the dagger. The blade was warm, humming with ancient magic. Without hesitation, he drew it across his palm. Blood welled up, thick and red, and he let it drip into the bowl of sacred water. It hissed on contact, steam curling like spirit. The seer stepped forward. "The bond may begin again, but only if the mate accepts it." Griffin nodded, breathless. His body trembled, not from weakness, but from the rawness of being broken open and made whole all at once. The flames vanished, the circle stilled. The trial was complete. But the rite was only half of it. Now came the harder part, facing Ayana, not as the alpha who once rejected her, but as the man who was finally ready to see her, ready to kneel, not in shame, but in reverence, and ask, not for forgiveness, but for a second chance. Moonlight bathed the clearing in a pale, glowing hush, casting long, silver shadows across the altar stone where Ayana knelt beside her son. Griffin stood across from her, bare-chested, marked with fresh runes, the dried blood of his trial still etched along the lines of his collarbone. The sacred circle shimmered faintly around them, woven of salt, ash, and old magic, older than crescent moon itself. Jalen lay in the center, his small body too still, his skin too pale. The faintest rise and fall of his chest was the only thing keeping Ayana upright. "He's ready," the seer whispered, her voice crackling like fire through the trees. Ayana nodded once, though nothing about her felt steady. Inside her, the bond stirred, faint but present. Griffin had completed the purification. She'd felt it the moment he stepped into the circle, his energy no longer sharp and shielded, but open, raw. She looked at him now. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The gravity in his eyes said it all. They began. Ayana reached out first, pressing her palm to Jalen's heart. "I give what I carried," she murmured, voice trembling. "Blood and breath, name and soul." Griffin moved next, kneeling beside their son. His voice was deeper, steadier, but lined with emotion he didn't try to hide. "I give what I denied, strength and bond, legacy and truth." Together, they spoke the final invocation, voices overlapping, weaving through each other like song and silence. "In the light of the moon, awaken what sleeps. Let the bloodline rise. Let the wolf be born." The circle flared to life, flames spiraling outward. Jalen's body jerked once, then again, harder. Ayana gripped his hand. "Jalen, it's okay. I'm here." He arched suddenly, a cry ripping from his throat. Not loud, but deep, like something ancient was clawing its way up from the marrow of his bones. His back lifted off the stone, eyes flying open, glowing faintly gold. Griffin moved to hold his shoulders, steady him. "Breathe, son. Let it come." Jalen convulsed, a tremor seizing him. The circle's light pulsed, flared, then dimmed. "No," Ayana whispered. "No, stay with us." Jalen's body went still, too still. The light vanished. Ayana's scream split the air. She gathered him into her arms, sobs breaking loose, fierce and guttural. "Please, please don't take him." Griffin reached for her. "He's not—" "Ayana, look!" A low sound curled through the clearing. It wasn't human. Ayana froze. Jalen's body trembled once, then again. And then the sound returned. A growl, weak but rising, vibrating from deep within his chest. His little hands clenched, his spine arched, and then his eyes opened. But they weren't gold anymore. They were molten silver, a perfect mirror of Ayana's. And then they shifted. Gold-ringed silver, flame meeting frost. Griffin's eyes. Jalen exhaled, and the air itself shuddered. Light exploded from his body in a sudden burst, knocking Ayana and Griffin backward as a radiant heat spread outward. The flames of the ritual roared back to life, surging high, wild, and bright. Wind howled through the trees, branches bending under the pressure, and at the center of it all, Jalen rose. Not stood. Rose. He hovered for a moment, eyes glowing, skin luminous. The energy around him wasn't that of a child. It was something else. Something old, inherited, holy. The blood of a healer. The blood of an alpha. Ayana could barely breathe. Then the wind died. The flames snuffed out. Jalen collapsed into Griffin's arms, unconscious, but breathing, alive. The seer stepped forward slowly, reverently. His wolf has come. Griffin looked down at the boy in his arms, wonder written across his face. He's strong. Ayana touched Jalen's cheek, brushing back sweat-damp curls. Stronger than either of us ever knew. Griffin glanced up at her, eyes dark and unreadable. He's going to need both of us. Ayana didn't respond at first. She couldn't. Her heart was too full, her throat too tight, but she didn't pull away when Griffin placed Jalen gently into her arms, his fingers brushing hers. Not with possession, but with something softer, a promise unspoken. They had given their son the only thing that mattered, a chance. And in that moment, as the moon dipped lower in the sky, Ayana realized something that had been waiting quietly in the background all along. This wasn't just the awakening of a wolf, it was the beginning of something far more dangerous. Hope. The sun was barely rising when Ayana stepped into the healer's quarters. The forest was still quiet, the air heavy with dew and the aftermath of ancient magic. Everything felt hushed, as if the land itself was recovering from what it had witnessed. Inside, Griffin sat near the window, his shoulders hunched, a thin sheen of sweat clinging to his skin. He looked less like the alpha of Crescent Moon and more like a man peeled back to his barest self, raw, worn, and bone-deep tired. He didn't turn when she entered. Didn't need to. Her scent reached him before her footsteps did, and something in his posture shifted, barely noticeable but real. A slow tension uncoiling. "You shouldn't be up," she said softly, standing in the doorway. "I'm not," he rasped, not turning. "Just not asleep either." Ayana stepped closer, her eyes tracing the curve of his shoulder, the faint bruising across his ribs, remnants of a ritual that had demanded far more than blood. It had taken will, pride, and the walls he'd built around himself for years. And still, he'd done it. For Jalen. And maybe, just maybe, for her. "You gave everything in that circle," she said, quieter now. "You risked more than I expected." He finally turned to look at her, and there was no armor left in his gaze. Just truth. "He's my son. There was never another choice." She nodded, though something in her chest twisted. "Still, I wasn't sure you'd make it." Griffin gave a weak huff of laughter. "Neither was I. Ayana moved to the far wall and leaned against it, her arms crossed. Not defensive, not exactly, more like bracing herself. They stayed like that for a moment. Two people who had once shared everything and then nothing, now caught in the ache of what still hung between them. "I saw you," she said finally. "When the bond reopened, I felt it. The pain you've carried." Griffin looked down at his hands. "I earned it." No argument there. His head lifted at her dry tone, a flicker of something like amusement passing through his expression. "But?" She exhaled slowly. "But you didn't hesitate. Not when it mattered." Silence stretched between them again, but it wasn't the sharp, bitter kind anymore. It was tentative, soft at the edges. "I thought I was doing the right thing," Griffin said, voice rough. "Back then, rejecting the bond, I told myself it was about strength, control, about protecting the pack, but the truth was, I was scared." Ayana tilted her head. "Of me? Of what you made me feel," he said simply. "Of how easily you saw through me. You made everything inside me unravel, Ayana. And I didn't know how to be that exposed, so I pushed you away before you could leave." She swallowed, throat tight. "But I never would have." "I know that now," he said. "Too late, maybe. But I know." Ayana turned her gaze to the window, watching the early light filter through the trees. "I spent years hating you. Not just for the rejection, but for making me carry all of it alone. For making me raise a son who didn't understand why his father wasn't there. I wanted to protect him from the pain of knowing he was unwanted." Griffin flinched. I know," she said, cutting him off gently. "I know that now, but it doesn't erase what was lost." "No," he said quietly. "It doesn't." They stood in the quiet again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. Something unspoken passed between them, something heavy and human. "I don't know what comes next," Ayana admitted. "For us, for Jalen. I'm still angry. Still not ready." Griffin nodded. "I'm not asking you to be." She looked at him then, really looked. He was still recovering. She could see it in the way his body leaned too heavily into the chair, the pallor of his skin. But his eyes held steady. No avoidance, no walls. "You've changed," she said. "I had to." She pushed off the wall and walked toward him, stopping just beside the chair. "You're still stubborn." "I'm still me." Her lips lifted at the corners. "Unfortunately." For the first time in 5 years, he smiled. Small, quiet, and real. Ayana brushed her fingers lightly against his shoulder, just once. A touch of acknowledgement. Of truth. "I'm not ready," she said again. Griffin nodded, accepting it without resistance. "I'll wait. If you never are, I'll still be here." She lingered a moment longer before turning toward the door. "Jalen's awake, asking for you." Griffin straightened. "Is he?" "He's strong," she said, pausing in the doorway. "Too strong for either of us to carry alone." And with that, she left. Griffin remained seated, the warmth of her touch still lingering on his skin like a ghost. Outside, the morning wind stirred the trees, and for the first time in years, the air didn't feel quite so heavy. Something had been lost, but not everything, and what remained might be enough. The wind carried laughter now, not the hushed, uncertain kind that tiptoes through grief, but full, open laughter that rang through the crescent moon grounds like a song no one had heard in far too long. Jalen's voice echoed between the trees as he ran circles around 2 pack pups, his feet light, his eyes shining with a golden hue that flickered in and out, a promise of the wolf still settling beneath his skin. Ayana stood near the edge of the training field, arms folded loosely as she watched him dodge and leap, unburdened for the first time since he'd been born. He was stronger now, brighter, no more night terrors, no more trembling hands, no more haunted silence. His wolf was still young, still untested, but it was there, whole and awake. And with it came a fire in him that Ayana had never dared to hope for. The pack had taken notice. What once would have drawn suspicion, a strange child appearing from nowhere, now drew quiet reverence. Some wolves nodded when they passed Ayana, still cautious but no longer cold. Others offered food, books, stories. One elder even gave Jalen a carved wooden talisman meant for a young alpha in training. The tide had turned, not all at once, but enough to feel it in the way the pack's energy shifted when she walked through. She'd returned as an outcast, but now they looked at her like something had been restored, and maybe, just maybe, it had. Behind her, footsteps approached. She didn't need to turn to know it was Griffin. His presence was as familiar as it was complicated, no longer sharp, but steady, changed. "He's fast," Griffin said, stopping beside her. "He's free," she answered, watching their son barrel into a pile of leaves with no regard for grace. Griffin's laugh was soft. "That too." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, eyes on Jalen, hearts somewhere between past and future. "He looks like you," Griffin said after a while. "He is you," she replied. "And me. Both." He nodded, then hesitated. She felt it before he spoke, the way the air shifted just slightly, like he was gathering something vulnerable in his chest and deciding whether to let it go. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about what I've built, what I thought mattered, about pride and how much I let it cost me." She glanced at him but didn't speak. Let him carry the weight this time. "I don't expect forgiveness," he continued. "I'm not asking for that. But I am asking if there's space, not just in the pack, in you, for something new." Ayana studied him. The man who once rejected her stood now with nothing to prove, only something to offer. Not command, not authority, not even apology. Just a chance. It was the first time he'd ever asked without expectation, and it was the first time she didn't feel the need to guard herself so tightly. "I can't give you an answer," she said honestly. "Not yet." "I'll wait," he said, just as he had before. Only this time, there was no pressure in the words, just patience. She looked back at Jalen. He was laughing again, wolf light flickering in his eyes as he shifted. Just a blink, just a flash, then returned to skin, panting with joy. Ayana smiled, a quiet ache swelling in her chest. "Whatever happens," she said, her voice low but sure, "he comes first. Always. And this," she motioned between them, "if we build anything, it has to be different. No pride, no fear." Griffin nodded. "Only truth." Ayana turned to him fully now, met his eyes without flinching. "Then we start from that." He didn't step closer, didn't press, just smiled. Small, hopeful, and real. Behind them, Jalen called out, "Mama, watch this!" Ayana turned with a laugh, lifting a hand. "I'm watching, baby. I'm always watching." Griffin stood beside her as their son sprinted forward, arms wide, joy bursting from every step. They had lost time. But now, they had something more valuable. Choice. The bond may have broken once, but this time they would build it by choice.